The rain had been falling for hours, steady and unbroken, drumming against the wide glass windows of Pichai home. Sundar sat in the living room, his laptop open but untouched on the coffee table. His mind wasn't on work for once. It was on his son Arav, who had been acting different, more quiet, more distant. There were no slammed doors or angry words, but there was a kind of heaviness in the boy's eyes, something Sundar had been too busy to notice before. That night, the air in the house carried a strange tension. Arav had called earlier, saying he'd be late getting home from school, which wasn't unusual. But it was the way he said it, his voice hesitant, like he was hiding something that made Sundar glance at the clock more than once. Then, just after 7, the front door creaked open. Sundar looked up, expecting his son to walk in with his backpack and maybe that tired half smile he always wore after a long day. But instead, Arav stepped in, dripping wet from the rain, and behind him was a boy Sundar had never seen before. The boy looked younger, maybe 12, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his thin frame swallowed by an oversized hoodie that looked like it had been worn for weeks without washing. He clutched a torn duffel bag to his chest, like it was the only thing in the world he owned. His eyes darted around the warm, well-lit home as if he didn't believe it was real. Double quotes dad. Arav began, his voice soft but trembling. This is Rishi. He's staying here tonight. Sundar's brows furrowed. Staying here? Arav, what's going on? Arav glanced at the boy, then back at his father. He's a foster kid, but the family he's with, they're not treating him right. I couldn't just leave him there. The words landed like stones in the silence. Sundar stood slowly, walking toward them, his eyes locked on Rishi. The boy didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if ready to bolt at the slightest wrong word. Did something happen? Sundar asked gently, his voice low. Dada AA followed hard. Yeah, I saw him after practice. He had bruises. I asked him about it, and he told me. I'm not sending him back. For a moment, Sundar's logical mind began to push forward there. Were protocols, there were systems in place, there were legalities. But then he looked at Rishi, at the way his fingers tightened around the duffel bag, at the way his gaze flicked to the door every few seconds, and Sundar felt his heart shift. Come. Inside, he said finally, his tone quiet but firm. Both of you. Let's get you warm. The boy hesitated before stepping in, his shoes leaving wet prints on the hardwood floor. Arav immediately grabbed a towel from the hallway and handed it to him. Sundar watched the way Rishi accepted it cautiously, as though kindness was something he hadn't learned to trust. They sat at the dining table, steam rising from 3 mugs of hot chocolate. Arav did most of the talking, explaining that Rishi's foster home was in a rough part of town, that the adults there barely fed him, and that there had been more than one incident where he'd been hit. Sundar listened without interrupting, but his mind was racing. This wasn't a simple matter of offering a guest room for the night. This was a storm waiting to break. When Rishi finally spoke, his voice was so soft Sundar almost missed it. I can go. I don't want to cause trouble. Sundar leaned forward, his eyes steady. You're not causing trouble. You're safe here, but we have to make sure we do this the right way. Rishi nodded but didn't seem convinced. That night, Sundar lay awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. He wasn't just thinking about the legal steps they'd have to take, or the calls to child services that would follow. He was just thinking about Arav, about the boy's quiet courage in bringing someone home when he could have looked the other way. And he was thinking about Rishi, who had walked into their home carrying more pain than any child should bear. The next morning, phone calls began. Child Protective Services, school counselors, even a local lawyer Sundar knew. Every call seemed to move in circles, with promises of follow-up and assessments. But Sundar knew bureaucracy was slow, and Rishi needed something faster. It was during one of these calls that his phone lit up with another. Incoming name, Elon Musk. Sundar almost didn't answer. He and Elon spoke occasionally, usually about collaborations or tech projects, never about personal matters. But something made him pick up. Sundar. Elon's voice came through, quick and direct. I heard something interesting. Your son brought a foster kid home. Sundar froze. How? Did you? Doesn't matter. Elon cut in. What's your plan? My plan is to make sure he's safe, Sundar replied, his tone sharper than he intended. There was a pause on the line. And then Elon said something that would change the course of everything. Good. Because if you're serious, I think we can do more than just keep him safe. I think we can change his life. But it's going to be messy. Sundar didn't know what he meant yet. But the way Elon said it, it was as if he already knew the ending to a story that was only just beginning. And Sundar had no idea that within days, Rishi's name would be in news headlines, that strangers across the world would be talking about him, and that the decisions made in this very moment would ripple far beyond the walls of their home. The knock on the door that evening would be the first sign of it. Asterisk, the knock came heavy and deliberate. The kind of knock that wasn't polite or hesitant, but one that announced itself with authority. Sundar froze mid-step, his hand still holding the coffee mug he had been carrying from the kitchen. Arav and Rishi, who had been sitting on the couch playing a video game, turned their heads toward the door at the exact same time. In the quiet that followed, Sundar could hear the rain tapping gently against the windows. But the sound was swallowed by the tension that crept into the room. Something in his gut told him this wasn't going to be a neighbor dropping off a misdelivered package. Stay here, Sundar said quietly to the boys, his voice calm but edged with caution. When he opened the door, he found two figures standing. There one was a tall man in a dark coat, his hair slicked back from the rain, and the other was a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard tucked under her arm. The man's expression was cold, and the woman's was unreadable. Mr. Pichai? The woman asked, glancing quickly at a file in her hand. Yes, Sundar replied, his grip tightening around the doorframe. We're from County Child Protective Services, she said, her tone brisk, professional. We received a report about a foster child currently in your home. Sundar's eyes narrowed slightly. That's correct. He's here because my son found him in unsafe conditions. I've already called your office this morning to begin the process of ensuring his safety. The man shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. And until that process is complete, you're in violation by keeping him here without authorization. The words landed hard, not because Sundar feared them, but because he could see the way Rishi's small frame appeared in the corner of his vision, hovering near the living room archway. The boy had heard every word, and in his eyes was that same flicker of fear Sundar had noticed the night before, the fear of being taken away again. With respect, Sundar said slowly, sending him back to that home would be sending him back to the very abuse we're talking about preventing. The woman shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the truth in his words. That's not for us to decide at this moment. The protocol is clear. We need to speak to the child, and we may need to take him back into our care for the time being. No, Rishi said suddenly, his voice breaking the heavy air. It wasn't loud, but it was filled with a desperate finality. I'm not going back. Arav stood up beside him, his own voice sharper. You can't make him. You have no idea what's been happening there. The man's eyes flicked between the boys before landing back on Sundar. Sir, if you interfere, this could escalate legally. Before Sundar could respond, the vibration of his phone in his pocket interrupted the moment. He pulled it out, and the name on the screen made him pause. Elon, he answered without moving away from the door. You're calling at an interesting time, he murmured. I know. Elon's voice came through, calm but purposeful. Those CPS reps are at your door right now, aren't they? Sundar's gaze sharpened. How do you trust me? Elon cut in. Let them in. Give them tea if you have to. I'm on my way. And bringing someone who can make this whole conversation different. Sundar felt an instinctive resistance to the idea. Inviting strangers in when the boy was already scared didn't feel right. But there was something in Elon's voice, a certainty, almost a command that made him hesitate. He stepped back from the doorway and gestured for the two CPS workers to come inside. They did so with stiff formality, brushing off raindrops, and glancing around the modern open space of the home. Rishi stayed close to Arav, his shoulders tense. The woman began asking questions about what had happened, how long Rishi had been here, the nature of his injuries. Sundar answered calmly, never raising his voice, never giving them a reason to accuse him of obstruction. But he could tell they were circling toward the inevitable conclusion, removal. For now, as they like to say, dot, and then 20 minutes later, the low hum of an electric car pulling into the driveway drew everyone's attention. The headlights cut through the rain as a sleek black Model S came to a smooth stop. The front door opened before Sundar could get to it, and Elon stepped inside, dressed casually in a dark hoodie and jeans, but with an unmistakable energy that filled the room. Behind him was a woman Sundar didn't recognize, tall, with short, silver hair, wearing a tailored navy suit and carrying a leather folder. She moved with the kind of authority that didn't require introductions. Sorry to crash your meeting, Elon said, scanning the room before locking eyes with the CPS workers. But I think we can speed this up. The silver-haired woman stepped forward and handed the CPS woman a card. I am an attorney specializing in child welfare cases, she said smoothly. And as of this moment, I'm representing both Mr. Pichai and the minor in question. You will not be removing this child from this home until we've reviewed the circumstances of his current placement. The CPS man frowned. And you are? Someone who wins cases you don't want to lose, she replied without blinking. There was a pause. One of those pauses where you could almost hear the shifting power in the room. The CPS woman glanced at her partner, and Sundar could see their confidence falter.elo and leaned casually against the wall, watching it all unfold. See, Sundar, he said lightly. Messy doesn't mean impossible. Sometimes it just means you need the right people in the room. But Sundar knew this was just the beginning. He could see it in the way Rishi was looking at Elon now, not with recognition, but with curiosity, as though sensing the stranger might somehow be connected to his fate. And when the CPS team finally left, muttering about follow-ups and next steps, Elon turned to Sundar with that unmistakable glint in his eye. We're not just going to protect him, he said. We're going to build something bigger. Something that changes the way kids like him are treated forever. Arav blinked. What do you mean? Elon smiled faintly, as if the details were already mapped out in his head. You'll see. But first, we need to take Rishi somewhere tomorrow. Somewhere that will make him believe the world isn't as small and cruel as he's been told. And with that, he left the room, making a quick call as he walked away, his voice low, urgent, but tinged with excitement. None of them knew yet that where Elon planned to take them would put Rishi directly in the path of a truth he had never been told. A truth that would make him question everything about his past. Asterisk, the rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind a sky that looked washed, clean, pale blue with streaks of lingering cloud. The air felt crisp, almost expectant, as if it knew something important was about to happen. Sundar stood by the kitchen counter, sipping tea and watching Arav and Rishi at the table. Arav was animated, trying to convince Rishi to eat another pancake. But Rishi's small bites and averted gaze told Sundar the boy was still unsure about everything, unsure about this house, about staying, about trusting anyone. By 9 o'clock. Elon's text arrived. Be outside in 15. Dress warm. No explanation. No location. Just that. 15 minutes later, they heard the hum of tires on the driveway again. This time, it wasn't the sleek black Model S from the night before. Instead, a matte gray Cybertruck rolled up, its angular frame catching the morning light, like some futuristic beast. The passenger window lowered, and Elon leaned out with a grin. Morning, gentlemen, he said. And future gentlemen, he added, nodding toward Rishi. Get in. We have a place to be. Sundar hesitated. Are you going to tell us where we're going? Nope, Elon replied cheerfully. Surprises are better. The drive took them out of the city, past the sprawling tech campuses, through quieter streets lined with old oak trees, and eventually onto a private road flanked by high fences. Rishi sat between Arav and Sundar in the back seat, his hands pressed together tightly in his lap. Sundar noticed he kept glancing at the fences, as though part of him feared they were meant to keep people in, not out. Eventually, the Cybertruck pulled up to a set of gates that slid open silently after scanning. Elon's vehicle. Beyond them lay something unexpected, a vast expanse of green, dotted with small buildings, gardens, and wide walking paths. But it wasn't just a park. There were children everywhere playing soccer, painting murals, riding bikes. Some were laughing, some were quiet, but all seemed free. Where are we? Bhairav asked, leaning forward to see better. Elon slowed the truck and glanced at them. This, he said, is a pilot project I've been funding quietly for the past 2 years. It's a transitional community for foster kids who've aged out of the system or been through too many placements. No overcrowded group homes, no. Rotating staff who barely know their names. Here they have stability, resources, and people who care. Rishi's eyes widened, but he said nothing. They stepped out of the truck, and a woman in her 50s with warm eyes and a firm handshake walked over. Mr. Musk, she said with a smile. And you must be Mr. Pichai. Sundar nodded. Call me Sundar. She turned to Rishi, crouching slightly so she was at his eye level. And you must be Rishi. We've heard a little about you. I am Miriam. Welcome. There was no clipboard in her hand, no hurried professionalism, just the kind of voice that sounded like it had time to listen. Rishi didn't respond right away, but Sundar saw the slightest shift in his posture. A tiny loosening of the shoulders dot as they walked through the grounds. Elon explained the concept in more detail. Every kid here has their own room. They get counseling, tutoring, life skills training. We partnered with tech companies, art programs, even local farms. It's about giving them the tools to stand on their own, not just dumping them. In the world at 18 and wishing them luck. Bhairav's voice was quiet when he said, So you're saying Rishi could live here? Elon shook his head. Not exactly. He's still a minor, so his case has to be handled differently. But I wanted him to see this, to know there are better possibilities than the ones he's been shown so far. They reached a small building painted in bright colors, with a large window looking out over a garden. Miriam led them inside, where a handful of kids were gathered around a table working on a puzzle. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon, and someone had left a guitar leaning against the couch. One boy, maybe 15, looked up and grinned. Hey, you knew? He asked Rishi. Rishi froze for a moment, then shook his head. Just visiting. Cool, the boy said easily. Returning to the puzzle. Miriam excused herself to speak with another staff member, leaving Sundar, Elon, and the boys by the window. Sundar noticed Rishi was staring outside at a group of kids planting something. In raised garden beds? I used to help my mom in her garden, Rishi murmured, almost to himself. Elon caught it. Where's your mom now? He asked, his voice light but not casual. Iris. I hesitated. She left a long time ago. I don't. You know where she is? Elon nodded slowly, saying nothing more. But Sundar noticed the brief glance Elon exchanged with Miriam when she returned, a glance that said there was more to that answer, and that Elon intended to find a. Before they left, Miriam handed Rishi a small paper bag. Just some snacks. For the ride back, she said with a smile. And a little notebook, right in it, if you ever feel like it. You don't have to show anyone. In the truck on the way home, Rishi opened the bag and pulled out the notebook. It had a plain brown cover, but when he flipped it open, he froze. There, on the inside cover, was a small photograph, tucked neatly into the first page. It was worn, the edges frayed, but the image was clear enough. A young woman kneeling beside a garden bed, smiling at the camera. Rishi's breath caught. This is my mom, he whispered. Sundar turned sharply. What? Rishi looked up, his eyes wide, his hands trembling slightly as he held the photo. How did this get here? Elon said nothing, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. But his grip on the steering wheel tightened almost imperceptibly. And in that moment, Sundar knew without asking that this was not an accident. Elon had put that photograph there. And whatever His reason, it meant that the next steps in this journey were going to be far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Asterisk, the hum of the Cybertruck filled the silence like a low, steady drumbeat. But inside the cabin, the air was anything but calm. Sundar's eyes kept shifting from the photograph in Rishi's trembling hand to Elon's face, searching for any flicker of expression that might give him away. But Elon drove on with the same measured control, his gaze locked on the road ahead. RV glanced between them, sensing something had shifted, but he said nothing. Rishi's breathing was uneven, and Sundar could see how tightly the boy clutched the picture, his knuckles pale. It was as if he was afraid it might vanish if he let go. Like everything else in his life had. Finally, Sundar broke the silence. His voice was low but edged with steel. Elon, where did that photograph come from? Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowed the truck as they approached a sharp bend in the private road, then guided it carefully around the curve before speaking. It came from someone I trust. Someone who's been looking into Rishi's case for a while. Asterisk, Sundar's brow furrowed. Looking into it? Before last night? You didn't even know. Elon cut him off with a small, almost reluctant smile. I knew about him, Sundar. I just didn't know he'd walk into your life this soon. The weight of that sentence hung heavy in the air. Arav blinked in confusion, leaning forward. Wait, what do you mean you knew about him? Elon exhaled, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Rishi's mother wasn't just any woman in the foster system. She was someone with a lot of people looking for her for very different reasons. Before she disappeared, she reached out to a contact of mine, trying to get her son placed somewhere safe. She never told me her name, but she sent one thing, that photo. I've kept it, waiting for the day I could figure out where her son ended up. Rishi's voice was barely above a whisper. You knew where she was? Elon shook his head. No. I only knew she was running from something dangerous. And I couldn't find her. I tried. But every trail went cold. Sundar felt a mix of suspicion and unease coil in his stomach. What kind of danger are we talking about? Elon glanced at him briefly, his eyes sharp but guarded. The kind you don't want to underestimate. The kind that might explain why she thought her son would only be safe if no one knew where he was. They drove in silence for several minutes after that, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Sundar kept thinking about the bruises on Rishi, the fear in his eyes when CPS had shown up, the way he didn't talk much about his past. And now, this revelation that there was something bigger, darker, tied to his mother's disappearance. When they finally reached Sundar's driveway, the boys got out first, Arav leading Rishi inside to get warm. Sundar lingered by the truck, waiting until the front door closed behind them before turning back to Elon. You've been holding back, Sundar said quietly. Elon stepped out of the truck, closing the door with a muted click. I've been waiting for the right moment. This isn't just about helping one kid, Sundar. If what I suspect is true, there are other children who've been caught in the same mess. Rishi's just the one we found first. Sundar's jaw tightened. Then you owe me the whole story. Now. Elon studied him for a long moment, then pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. This has everything I've gathered: names, places, timelines. Some of it is guesswork, some of it is fact. Read it tonight. Tomorrow we talk next steps. Sundar took the drive, feeling its small weight in his palm. If this is as serious as you're making it sound, Elon, you should have come to me sooner. Elon's voice softened, but it lost none of its urgency. And if I had, you might not have believed me. But now you've seen him, you've seen what's at stake, you're not going to walk away from this. Sundar didn't answer. He watched as Elon climbed back into the truck, the Cybertruck's taillights glowing red in the fading light. Before disappearing down the road. Inside, Arav and Rishi were on the couch, the photograph lying carefully on the coffee table between them. Sundar stood there for a moment, watching them, before heading to his study. He closed the door, sat down at his desk, and plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The folder opened, revealing dozens of files, photos, documents, scanned letters, maps with red circles drawn around certain cities. One file caught his attention immediately. Case 0. He clicked it open, and the first image filled his screen. It was the same woman from the photograph, Rishi's mother, but this time she wasn't smiling in a garden. She was in a dimly lit room, holding a baby in her arms, looking directly into the camera with eyes that were wide and urgent. Beneath the photo, a single line of text read, "If you're seeing this, it's already too late for me. Just protect my son." Sundar leaned back in his chair, the words sinking into him like ice. The room seemed colder somehow, the shadows deeper. He didn't know what she had been running from, but he knew one thing for certain. It was coming for RIS. And as the thought settled in, the sound of glass breaking somewhere in the house snapped his head up. Asterisk, the sound of shattering glass was sharp, immediate, and wrong. It wasn't the faint tinkling of a dropped cup. It was the deep, resonant crack of a window giving way under force. Sundar was on his feet before the shards had finished scattering, his chair sliding back and bumping against the wall. His mind moved faster than his body. Arav and Rishi were in the living room. The broken window could mean an accident, but every instinct told him it didn't. He stepped quietly to his desk, pulling open the bottom drawer. Beneath some old papers and a charger was the heavy flashlight he'd kept there for years. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but its solid weight in his hand felt reassuring. Moving quickly, but quietly, he opened the study door just enough to slip out. The air in the hallway felt cooler. He could sense the draft coming from the far end of the house. As he reached the living room, he saw Arav on the couch, frozen mid-motion, his eyes darting toward the source of the noise. Rishi was standing, gripping the edge of the coffee table, his face pale. "Dad." Arav's voice was tight. "Stay here," Sundar ordered, glancing toward the kitchen where the draft was strongest. But before he could take 2 steps, a figure emerged from the shadows near the broken glass door. Tall, wearing a dark hooded jacket, and moving with a kind of purposeful stillness that sent a chill through the room. The person stepped forward, glass crunching under their boots, and stopped just inside the frame of the doorway. Nobody spoke. At first, the air was thick with the electric hum of tension. Then the figure's gaze shifted, locking on Rishi. "You need to come with me," the stranger said, voice low and flat. Rishi's breathing hitched, and Sundar saw the boy take an instinctive step back. "No," he said, the single word trembling. But defiant. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a choice." That was enough for Sundar. He stepped forward, placing himself between Rishi and the intruder. "You've got 3 seconds to turn around and leave before this becomes a police matter." The figure tilted their head slightly, almost amused. "Police? You think they'll protect him?" Their gaze flicked toward the photograph still, lying on the coffee table. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Mr. Pichai." Before Sundar could answer, there was movement outside fast. Heavy footsteps on the wet grass, and then the front door burst open. Elon was there, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, each moving with precision and speed. One of them crossed the room in seconds, positioning himself between Sundar and the intruder. While the other moved to secure the doorway, the hooded figure glanced at Elon, and for the first time, their posture shifted less certain now. But still unwilling to back down. "You too late," the intruder said. "They already know he's here." Elon stepped forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Then you can go back and tell them he's staying here, under my protection, and if they want to push that, they'll find out just how far I'm willing to go." The stranger didn't answer. They took one last, lingering look at Rishi. Ben turned and stepped back out into the night. The sound of their boots faded into the darkness until there was only the low hum of tension in the room. Arav exhaled slowly, his shoulders finally dropping. Rishi stayed silent, his eyes locked on the doorway, as if expecting the stranger to reappear. Sundar turned to Elon, his voice quiet but urgent. "What was that?" Elon didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for the men in suits to sweep the perimeter. Only when the house was secured did he speak. "That," Elon said, "was confirmation of what I've suspected since I first saw that photograph." Rishi's mother wasn't just hiding from an abusive home. She was hiding from people who wanted something from her, or from him, and they're still looking. Sundar glanced at Rishi, who was now holding the photograph again, his hands trembling. Why? Sundar asked. What could they possibly want from a boy? Elon's gaze darkened. Sometimes, Sundar. It's not what someone has, it's what they are. And Rishi's mother, she may have been involved in something bigger than either of you realize. Something dangerous. Something worth chasing halfway across the world. Rishi's voice was barely audible. Are they going to find me? Elon crouched so he was eye level with the boy. Not if we move first. And then he looked at Sundar with that same unshakable certainty he'd shown the night they first spoke about Rishi. Pack a bag. Both of you. We leave tomorrow morning. I'll explain everything on the way. But as Sundar walked toward his room later that night, the thought gnawed at him. If Elon was right, then they weren't just protecting Rishi anymore. They were walking straight into whatever storm his mother had been running from. And storms, Sundar knew. Always found a way to catch up. Asterisk morning came not with calm sunlight, but with the restless stillness that often precedes a storm. Sundar had barely slept. He'd spent most of the night pacing between his study and the living room, the flash drive still plugged into his laptop, its files gnawing at his thoughts. In the faint light before dawn, he'd stood at the window and wondered, not for the first time, whether bringing Rishi into his home had been an act of courage or an invitation for danger to cross his threshold. Now, as the first streaks of gray light cut across the driveway, Elon's Cybertruck idled outside, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the men inside. Sundar carried a small duffel bag in one hand, the other resting gently on Rishi's shoulder as they approached the vehicle. Arav trailed behind them, carrying a backpack, his face set in a mixture of worry and resolve. Asterisk. Inside the truck, Elon greeted them with a short nod. We've got a flight waiting, private airstrip. No stops until we get there. Get where? Sundar asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Elon's gaze flicked to Rishi before answering. To the only person who can tell us the truth about his mother. The drive to the airstrip was tense and silent, save for the muted hum of the electric engine. Rishi sat pressed against the window, watching the blur of passing trees and buildings. Sundar studied him in the reflection. The boy's expression was caught somewhere between fear and hope. Like someone afraid to believe the promise of safety, they boarded a sleek jet that seemed ready the moment they arrived. Once airborne, Elon finally began to talk. He laid it out with the precision of a man who had rehearsed every detail. Rishi's mother had once worked for a research division tied to clean energy and environmental innovation, a place that operated under the radar because its work had the potential to disrupt billion-dollar industries. She had discovered something Elon never specified exactly what that could have been revolutionary, but it had also made her a target. She knew the kind of people who'd try to take it. From her, Elon said, his eyes fixed on Sundar. So she disappeared. But she couldn't take Rishi with her without painting a target on him too. So she left him somewhere she thought he'd be invisible. She miscalculated. Rishi's voice was so small they almost didn't hear it. Why didn't she come back for me? Elon's tone softened. Because she couldn't. And because she thought that if she stayed away, you'd be safe. She was wrong about that too. The jet descended hours later over a stretch of lush, remote coastline. A small compound stood near the water, surrounded by nothing but hills and ocean. As they drove up in a waiting vehicle, Sundar felt the weight. Of the place, it had the quiet of somewhere designed for secrecy. Inside, a woman waited in a sunlit room. Her hair was longer now, streaked with gray, and her face carried the lines of years spent looking over her shoulder. But her eyes were the same as in the photograph. Mom? Rishi's voice cracked as he stepped forward. She dropped to her knees and opened her arms. Rishi ran to her, and the sound he made, half sob, half relief, was enough to make Sundar turn his gaze away for a moment. The embrace was long, trembling, and silent, broken only when she pulled back to study. His face, as if memorizing every feature. I'm sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry. Sundar could see she meant every word, but He could also see something else in her eyes dash fear.elo and stepped forward. They found him, he said simply. She nodded grimly. I know. They've been moving closer for weeks. They think I still have it, do you? Elon asked Dot. She hesitated. No, I destroyed it. But they'll never believe that? Before anyone could respond, the sound of engines echoed outside. Sundar moved to the window in time to see two black SUVs kicking up dust as they approached the compound. Elon's security team was already in motion, positioning themselves near the entrance. Get them out, Elon said to his men. Back exit, straight to the dock. But Rishi's mother shook her head. No, if we run, they'll never stop. They'll keep chasing him, no matter where we hide. She looked at Elon, then at Sundar. We end it here. The next minutes were a blur of movement, Sundar helping guide Rishi to a safer room. Elon's men preparing to confront whoever stepped out of those SUVs. When the vehicle stopped, 4 men emerged, dressed in dark clothing, their expressions hard. One of them called out, his voice carrying easily in the salt-heavy air. We don't want trouble. Just give us the boy. Not happening, Elon replied. His voice even but lethal. Dot the standoff stretched, tension wound tight as a wire. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, Rishi's mother stepped forward. You're looking for me, she called out. He's not who you want. I'm the one who had it, and it's gone. The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting her to surrender herself. After a long pause, the leader gave a curt nod, and 2 of them moved toward her. Mom, Rishi cried out, trying to break free from Sundar's grasp, but she looked back at him with a calm, steady gaze. It's okay. This is how it stops. You'll be safe now. They took her, and within minutes the SUVs were gone, disappearing into the horizon. Silence settled over the compound, heavy and unresolved. Elon put a hand on Rishi's shoulder. We'll get her back, he said quietly. But for now, she bought us time. Enough to make sure you're untouchable. And Sundar, standing beside them, felt the strange, painful truth. Sometimes kindness wasn't about what you could keep, but about what you were willing to lose to protect someone else. Dot as the waves crashed against the shore outside. He made himself a silent promise. This wasn't the end. Dot. It was just the start of the fight to bring her home.